Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Better Satellite World, the podcast of Space and Satellite Professionals International. I'm Lou Zaccarella. This Better Satellite World podcast is brought to you by the 3,000 members of Space and Satellite Professionals International and our chapters worldwide. Thank you, SSPI. Additional support comes from our corporate partners, EchoStar Hughes, Northrop Grumman, Access Intelligence, and the law firm of K&L Gates. Well, today we continue our new three-part series and take a look at the important technologies and companies on the ground who manage all of that traffic and all that good stuff in space. This series is underwritten with the generous support of Kongsberg Satellite Services. You know them as KSAT. KSAT is a leading provider of ground station services for satellites, rocket launchers, and experimental spacecraft. Did you know KSAT supports 95% of the commercial satellites launched into non-geostationary orbit? KSAT's network spans over 180 antennas at 20 ground stations across the globe and includes coverage from Antarctica to the Arctic. KSAT is proud to be the sponsor of this series and of SSPI's role in making a better satellite world. A programming note here, when this episode was recorded, our guest, Katherine Monson, was the CEO of KSAT. Katherine has since moved on. Ms. Monson began her career as one of the first employees with Spire Global. During her time at Spire, she led the ground station department, building out a global network of infrastructure to download data from a constellation of, at that time, over 40 satellites. Before finding her way into the industry, she advised Fortune 500 companies, specializing in high-stakes negotiations and high-impact strategic partnerships. Katherine began her career as a fellow at the U.S. Department of Defense. Katherine Monson, welcome to the Better Satellite World.
Great. Thank you, Lou. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm hoping that this podcast isn't sort of a high-stakes exercise for you, but I know that KSAT is a relatively new type of business model, and it's one that people are saying is really the ground infrastructure model for the future. So what I thought I'd do is for those of you who don't know KSAT, we'll ask Katherine, what is the business model? And do you think it is the ground structure model, infrastructure model for the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, Lou. And, when you say it's a new business model, I guess new is really a matter of perspective and it's all relative. So you mentioned in the intro that KSAT is a company that has existed for 50 years. And what we've been providing for 50 years is exactly the same that we provide today, which is satellite services, particularly for non-geostationary satellites. So satellites that are moving relative to the Earth. What I think has changed in the last couple of years is we've seen a shift in the industry from there being a lot of focus in the geo world, so the geostationary satellites. And in that world, the ground model is different. So there tends to be a one-to-one relationship between antenna and spacecraft. That shift has happened as more and more folks have been looking at business cases for LEO, low Earth observation, or low Earth orbit satellites. A lot of them are Earth observation satellites. So that has definitely caused there to be a huge amount of attention on tracking antennas, and that's exactly what we do at KSAT. Is we have over 180, actually I believe the number is now over 200 tracking antennas within our network. And the interesting thing about the business model then is that we've really disrupted that one-to-one relationship. So there's not an antenna is not waiting for one satellite to come back every 90 minutes. That antenna may track one spacecraft. It may take a 10-minute pass, let's say at Svalbard, and then may turn slew within the next 10 seconds and start tracking an entirely separate spacecraft. So I think that's really the big change we've seen is the shift from GEO to LEO has put a lot more focus on the ability to do multi-mission support.
Yeah, and I don't know if people completely appreciate just how complicated that is. I mean, it's not like observing the New York City bus fleet, right, where you've got the M15 bus and then the M66 comes behind it, and you're sort of tracking the arrival times and so forth. This is considerably different because, as you say, we haven't been living in the low Earth orbit satellite world very long. I mean, in order to make that transition, how challenging was the technology shift that had to take place at KSAT? And do you consider the investment in LEOs, which haven't 100% proved themselves yet in the minds of many, still a somewhat high risk investment?
Oh, I wouldn't say that it's high risk at all. I think one of the benefits of working with a provider like KSAT is that we do work with so many different mission sets. So when we're looking at investing in new antennas and new technologies, we're not basing it off of one spacecraft, whether that spacecraft is successful or not. We're looking instead at the industry and saying, okay, here has been the investment in the space. Here's where we see the future being in 5 and 10 years. And with that, we're incredibly confident about the growth of the future of LEO.
Hmm.
There have been so many companies coming forward with innovative ideas on how to collect interesting data from space. And I think that's really what it comes back to. And that's also a very healthy thing about the industry right now is that the space pieces are known commodities now. So humans have been in space now for almost 100 years. We'll get there hopefully in my lifetime. And rather than thinking about the space part being hard and getting so fixated on the methodology, now we're really starting to look at how does this scale? So how can people create
Yeah.
business cases on space platforms? And I think that's a really important shift in general that New Space has brought to the table, which is stop thinking about the space part, focus instead on the data. Who cares about this data? Who's willing to pay for it? The platform itself is just a way of getting the data to Earth.
Yeah, that's a great insight, and again, I like I like your approach to that because it's something that I've been trying to advocate in a different capacity. Trying to evangelize for the industry and all that it can do for human society as well. But I continue to tell people the risks that we experience have changed in our industry. They are looking a lot more like the traditional business quote risks. It's not the launch. It's not the space stuff that I guess historically would concern or scare people, right? It is choosing the right technologies, choosing the right business models, making the appropriate investment, planning your company for the future, just like any other enterprise would. Um, and so, it leads me to ask the question for a company that's been around for 5 decades. Um, do you think looking at, again, small sats and some of the evolution beyond that with regard to the new vertical markets that are using our services, have you been there before? Has KSAT been here before at these decision points? And are you experiencing similarities as you kind of go forward and develop the model and the platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we used to have our US office in the Silicon Valley. So we used to be in Santa Clara, California. We've recently moved as of July to Colorado, which has been a really healthy move for us. There's a great aerospace population here. But I referenced the Valley because there, is an adage in the Silicon Valley, which is innovate or die. You
Hmm.
can also say it as don't wait for someone to disrupt you. You need to constantly disrupt yourself. And I think that's a really healthy mindset that the aerospace industry is learning as well. And like you said, the aerospace industry more and more looks like just another industry where people are trying to make business decisions and make sure that they're doing the right thing by the business. So at KSAT, we really looked hard at the small sat industry. And I say industry now, but 10 years ago, 5 years ago even, it was more of an experiment. So there were folks promoting different ways of accessing space. And we said, okay, that's interesting. How can we help these folks succeed? And what we realized was the one kind of big piece that ground can contribute is how can we create an offering in the marketplace that offers a high level of quality. So these folks need to be able to survive. They need to be able to show their investors that this is going to work, but we need to be able to do it at a lower price point. So we need to make sure that we're not stressing out these companies who have gone to ask for money from investors, and they have a limited runway that they need to prove success. So we really challenged ourselves to say, okay, how do we make a very good ground station that we can provide at a lower cost of entry. So how do we take that cost basis and push it down? And we
Mm-hmm.
landed on a couple of different things. One of the big kind of realizations we had was that a lot of our missions, we were sitting on quite a lot of link budget. So for those who are not in the RF comms chain, essentially you're looking at what is the sensitivity you need on the ground to be able to detect very faint signals coming from space, and that determines how big your antenna is. And we realized that for a lot of missions, we could actually use a much smaller antenna if we were willing to take on a little bit more, and I won't say risk, but essentially just not have quite so much of an overscope on the antenna size. So we settled on a standard, which is a 3.7 meter antenna. And that works great for a lot of small sats. And so bringing that antenna size down is one way we brought the cost basis down. Another major way that we were looking at bringing the cost basis down is how do we schedule these antennas more efficiently? So how do we take expensive humans out of the loop? And also how do we optimize time on the antennas? So we landed at doing a fully machine-to-machine scheduling system, and that's what our
Mm-hmm.
KSAT Lite uses. So that's been very great. And then I think the third major way that we were able to say, look, we can make this more accessible to folks is that we said we need to make this standard. So up until this point, most space missions continued, and they continue to be this way in a lot of places in the industry. But many space missions had been run on a program by program basis. So each program would go out and say, what do we need for, what is our power? What is our propulsion? What is our ground? What is our comms? And each of those decisions would be made on a program by program basis. And in the past, we've worked really closely with companies to say, okay, yep, this is going to be the ground solution for this program. What we decided for small sats is we needed to create a standard to say we're going to build this network and provide that capability to folks so that instead of doing this in a bespoke way, it was more like buying a train ticket rather than buying a train.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, been a really powerful way that we've unlocked a lot of cost efficiency to be able to provide a really high quality of service, but takes, again, some of that expensive human engineering out of it by saying we're going to design it once and we're going to design it in a way that hopefully meets most people's requirements. And then we can
Yeah.
tweak from there rather than each time designing something new.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that really is a departure for the satellite industry that I grew up in, where you were making it was almost like an artisan's industry, right? You were making a new thing every time. And the reference to Silicon Valley is an appropriate one in that what you're reaching for there is the ability to scale by standardizing. And as I understand KSAT Lite, there are various offerings in X band, S band, and of course the popular Ka band. And so you're able to put those out into the market depending on what the company or the antenna manufacturer, whomever needs. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been such a successful validation of the model of you need to constantly be trying to disrupt yourself. We launched KSAT Lite just over 5 years ago now, and now are doing over, I believe it's close to 50,000 passes a month on that network alone.
Right.
So that's been a huge proof of concept for us to say, look, we need to think differently about what we've been doing. Um, Someone asked me recently if KSAT was a startup, and I was just so thrilled by that question because not too many 50-year-old companies in the aerospace industry, probably get the question of, oh, are you a
That's
startup?
right.
So
That's right.
it's nice that we are able to take all of the operational excellence that we've developed over 50 years. And I say this sometimes too, it's not that we're extra smart people at KSAT, but when you've been doing something for 50 years, you've made a lot of the mistakes that can be made. And most of the mistakes in aerospace, you get burned once and you don't ever do that again. So we do have a high quality of excellence because we've been around and been doing this for a long time. But to be able to take that expertise and then still think differently, I think is a really special thing. And I think in general is something that we'll keep promoting at KSAT is never get too comfortable. Make sure that we're always pushing to the horizon.
Yeah, it is, and it is true that after 50 years, even a great company, just it tends to get cautious. It's kind of like almost nature that you do that, but to not do that, to swim upstream is really a remarkable quality. And I actually have to ask the question, is there something in the culture where Arnulf, who's the head of the company, or others, has been able to sort of put this into the culture of the company? Is there something there, or is it
Oh,
being,
absolutely. Yeah. No, so Arnav, our COO, and Rolf, our CEO, are both people who are deeply passionate about space, about the industry. They both have very strong vision for how KSAT is a fundamental piece of supporting this industry. And I think that's really what it takes.
and again, that's another great point. I think that's what makes our industry a lot of fun as well. There is that need to collaborate. If you are taking on big ideas, you do need to collaborate, and I think collaboration is the secret sauce within innovation. You have to learn how to do it, and not sort of devolve into groupthink, but continue to create. And that is obviously, what people think about when they talk about KSAT. I wanted to just get back on this notion of disruption, Catherine, in that disruption is either required of, being forced on, or being initiated by, I can't tell which, the antenna industry. And I have to ask you, because you work with a lot of those companies, is the antenna design today adequate to meet the needs of the new fleets and some of the more innovative requirements that you guys have for the marketplace?
So it's a good question. And my background is on the ground side, so I won't speak to the space side antennas. There are folks way more qualified than I who can address the space side antennas.
Okay, let's stay
On
on
the
the ground.
ground side, yeah, on the ground side, we have had really great experiences with the folks who are manufacturing tracking antennas. The push is always to make sure that we're keeping these antennas online at very high duty cycles. So the improvements in the mechanical engineering are typically, how do you take something from, let's say, hypothetically failing once a month to failing once a year? And that type of SLA, as folks who have SLAs know, going from a 99 to a 5 nines is a tough thing to do. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of incremental change of really trying to push some of these failure states down to zero. I think where there's a lot of discussion and some very interesting discussion and work being done is on the phased arrays.
Yeah.
So, we started off by talking about KSAT Lite and how the entire goal there was, how do you bring the cost basis down? How do you make space more accessible to more? How do more business cases close? And phased arrays, I think, are an interesting piece of this. So with the larger telecom constellation, so folks trying to provide access to the internet for underserved populations, they are really trying to make a business case close first on economy of scale, so having a lot of users, but then having a lot of users means you have to have a lot of end user terminals. So that's where I think there's really some exciting innovation opportunities and a lot of really smart folks working on making that business case close on the end user terminal. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a
I mean,
tough problem. It's a very tough problem.
well, it is, because I was going to ask you. I mean, I moderate a lot of the panels with some of these folks, and obviously I know them and see them a lot. They are challenged to do the kinds of things that you've been able to do at KSAT to a large degree, which is to find the scale point and the price point. And they haven't quite gotten there yet, have they? Or do you want to name some names about who might be the horse to bet on this?
Yeah, I think you're right to say that the economy of scale is going to be one of the major challenges there. Um, we have seen big growth in the aerospace industry, but again, everything is relative. So we've gone from a handful of space programs happening a year to potentially hundreds of satellites launching a year. But in the world of hardware and hardware innovation, we are nowhere close in the space community to the number of cell phones that exist, for example. So we
Hmm.
still think and speak in the scale of hundreds, maybe thousands. We're not talking millions, we're not talking billions. So, when we're thinking about chip manufacturers, folks who are running foundries, that's also a very capital intensive process. They are looking to make money off of these scales of millions. So I think that's really the challenge here, is that the scale of space is so far challenging to have an application directly for space. So that's where I've had some interesting conversations with folks, which is to say, how do we take technologies and advancements in hardware from other sectors, so telecom being a good example, and how do we then apply that to space rather than expecting that the space industry is going to be able to independently drive the demand for some of these high cost manufacturing technologies.
Right. Will there be other applications in vertical markets that will also, inform that or drive that? In a terrific article called "Earning the Right to Exist: The Small Sat Revolution," the scope that small sats are tasked with to solve, and the opportunities that they can touch in weather and maritime activity, but also in communities, cities and so forth that are going to be continuing to need to adapt more because they're going to be introducing artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, into these processes. Will that, in many ways, push this along a little bit? Do you think, enforce a little scale?
Oh, I absolutely hope so. And I
Yeah.
think we are sitting in a turning point in the industry, which, it's said in other industries, and I have to think it's more true in space than in any other industry, but it is rising tides float all boats. So many pieces of this industry are so capitally intensive. So launch has been one that there's been a lot of attention paid to, are there enough launches available for small sats? How expensive is it? Is it possible to try to bring cost basis down through rideshare? I think there have been good successes on that front.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and this is an example of the more people who are trying to get to space, the marginal cost for any one person comes down because there are opportunities to take advantage of that economy of scale. So launch is a prominent example. Ground we've talked about is another. Manufacturing is definitely one where, it's a lot cheaper to make it's cheaper marginally to make 20 units rather than 5. So I
Right.
think this is an interesting time because I sincerely hope, and I think a lot of us are watching to see so many of these programs are headed towards success. And with that success, I think is going to unlock actually an entirely new round of success where business cases that before had been marginal, maybe as some of these as the cost basis comes down, maybe some of those business cases do start to close. So
Yeah,
the
I think.
local government who couldn't afford to buy imaging data 10 years ago, maybe can now. And with that success begets more success. So I think we really are at an exciting time, Lou, and it's going to be interesting to see what the next 10, 15, 20 years hold.
It really is, and I think the landscape will change for the automotive manufacturers and cities, with regard to how they manage traffic. The autonomous vehicle revolution will by and large have as its infrastructure satellites. Satellites will play a significant role in that, and I think that's going to change everything. I suspect that 50% of us won't own our own vehicles in a very, very short period of time, but we need the kind of infrastructure that we provide in our industry, and the data provisioning that we have in our industry in order to make this stuff happen. So I think we have to be really smart about, to your continuous point, innovating to get to that level or to that point into those markets. Uh, where are the traditional independent teleports going to be, and what are they going to need to do in order to serve media and other customers over the next few years? Are they going to be able to move along as quickly for these models with these models?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I always think it is interesting because, the aerospace industry is a small industry. Typically, I find people are 1 or 2 degrees separated from each other. But it does seem that it has been a bit siloed in the past. And I think, teleport, referring to often a ground station that serves telecommunications customers, typically geosatellites, is definitely one world. And that seems to be a little distinct, and the folks don't seem to collaborate or intermingle as much with the folks like KSAT that do primarily the NGSO support, so the non geostationary satellite work.
Hmm.
So I think that's interesting as we see more and more. Spacecraft that are moving relative to Earth. So again, they could be above the geobelt. They could be monitoring the geobelt. Um, we're seeing more teleports reach out to us, and we're very excited about this because we don't own all of our own real estate.
Right.
So we do own quite a bit of real estate, but KSAT is not a real estate company. Not by any stretch. The real estate, again, is just the necessary component to be able to provide services. So I do think there are big opportunities for teleports to join global networks. We're certainly always interested in hearing what people, what capabilities they have when we're looking and working with teams that are rolling out sometimes over 100 new sites for some of their end user terminals. We definitely want to have a very short list at our fingers of people that we've already vetted to say, yep, these folks are top notch. They completely understand the comms, the power requirements, the security requirements. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for teleports who may be more regionally based to start working together with companies such as KSAT or, potentially with each other to start building these global coalitions, because more and more folks are wanting to have a one-stop shop when it comes to ground rather than have to negotiate over 100 separate contracts.
Yeah, well, they'll be happy to hear you say that, Katherine. So I'll pass the podcast along to them as well. Just final question, and a quick one. We're the better satellite world. We really do believe that we inspire people because of what we've done as an industry to make the world a better place. If looking ahead, peering ahead and saying over the next 10 years, I believe small sats will do this one thing that will make the world a better place. What in your vision do you think that is?
I could say so many things. That's such a good
You can
question,
only
Lou.
say one. Only say one.
That's fair. That's fair. And I will be clear that I'm speaking for me, Katherine, not for KSAT. So what I
Uh-huh.
am personally motivated by is even just recently, I've seen so many powerful images of Australia that our partners at Maxar have been sharing in open source, in public forums. And I think where we as a satellite and space industry are adding value in such an important way right now is the access to information. So, in a world where we have data coming at us from all different directions, some of it with certain agendas or certain slants, I think increasingly having the ability to share information about our world, about our planet, about how it's changing, and providing that to folks in a way that they can access so that not only government agencies are looking at it, but people are able to look at it and make their own decisions, make their own opinions. I think that's going to be really powerful. And I think this new generation that is, coming out of schools now really has been trained to be much more media savvy. And they are going to want to look at original source materials. And I think the satellite industry is uniquely positioned to be able to say, so you're curious about climate change. Here are some of the images that have been taken optically. Here is the warming information that NASA spacecraft have been able to capture. Here are the sea level rising information that we've been able to track based on, bouncing lasers off of the surface of the ocean. So I think that is really where we're going to see such a huge opportunity to impact decisions that are made in the world is by providing that information to people, not just governments.
No, I think that's well said. And we have the tools and the skills now for managing data. And as you say, a generation out there that actually knows how to use them. So we might get some of these things done. I'm optimistic as well. Katherine, we could go on forever, but I wanted to really thank you for making the time to have this discussion with me.
Well, that concludes part 2 of our Better Satellite World Series, Safe Landing. I'd like to again thank Katherine Monson. This podcast was brought to you by KSAT with the additional support of EchoStar Hughes, Northrop Grumman, Access Intelligence, and the law firm of K&L Gates, and the 3,000 members and global chapters of SSPI. Stay tuned for the final episode of this series next week. Now, you can learn more about how you can support the Better Satellite World Series at bettersatelliteworld.org. Reminder, if your company has a talented executive, or more than one, under 35 years of age, now is the time to nominate them for an Industry Promise Award. SSPI's 20 Under 35 Awards program is underway. You have until September 30th to submit a nomination on their behalf. For more information, visit sspi.org. And follow us on Twitter at SSPI and check us out on LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you're not a member of SSPI and would like to learn more, go to sspi.org. Membership is only $100 a year and entitles you to thousands of dollars of discounts and free stuff. And if you are a student, your membership is free. For Space and Satellite Professionals International and our producer Ana Gomez, I'm Lou Zaccarella. Let's make it a better satellite world. Take care, everybody.